Louise, this is a Dublin City Council thing. As far as I understand, this latest proposal has been proposed before. What exactly are they talking about?
It's been proposed many times, and like you said, this is something that there's been a lot of conversation about it. There's been pushback on it in government, then suddenly government is all for it. But like you said, this is something that was proposed by Dublin City Council a couple of months ago, and a lot of the councils had actually come together and said that this would be a good idea for tourism in the capital. Now, what was interesting at the time, and back in April, Taoiseach Simon Harris said that he would be quite nervous about the introduction of such a tourist tax, that he said that hotels have been through a lot and the timing of it would have to be right. And that kind of put a kibosh on it, if you like. And you had other ministers coming out, including Patrick O'Donovan, say that they didn't think it was a good idea. Interestingly enough, the Dublin City Task Force report was relaunched. It was initially launched in October, but it was relaunched by the government last month. And as part of that, the idea of exploring this tourist tax came up. And what Micheál Martin said at that time was that the government wants to improve the city centre. They want to make it a place that people want to go, because it's become pretty derelict, it's become pretty run down, it's become somewhere that people don't enjoy going. And they were saying, you know, Dublin is the first impression you get of the country, so they want it to be good. So they were saying that they would explore that it could bring in anywhere from 4 million to 41 million. So quite a wide estimation of what it could actually bring in. They didn't have a more specific number. 12 million euro is the other number that's going around.
And that's based on what percentage of a tax?
Well, this is the big question. I suppose this is what we don't really know. Like, could it be quite small? Could it just be a couple of euro from every tourist, and it kind of adds up that way? But I think it's quite interesting, because some people are really for it, some people are really against it. Simon Harris, what he said, after saying he was nervous in April, what he said at that press conference last month, he said this is going to be all about the timing. And you would question, is that a case of, you know, it's going to be pushed down the road and it's not something that this government, and in particular Fine Gael, want to do, or is it something that will be done? So it is quite a controversial proposal, I think. You know, the hotels say they are struggling. Could this help them, or will this push people away? It's really unclear.
Michael, as Louise says, some people for it, some people against it. Where do you lie?
Good evening, Kieran, and indeed good evening to your panellists and indeed the viewers across the country this evening. Our position is very clear in the Irish Hotels Federation. We represent nearly 1,000 hotels and guest houses in Ireland, many of our members in Dublin. And Louise is quite correct. On the 24th of June, there was a roadmap for delivery of the Dublin City Task Force, and it has contained proposals for a tourism tax for visitors staying in Dublin. Our position is very clear. A tourist tax of any nature in any city or in any part of Ireland is something that is not positive and should not be welcomed. And we take that position for many reasons. First of all, to be clear about this is an additional tax on not just visitors to Ireland, but in fact for people living in the country and indeed potentially going to stay in Dublin. So let's just say we have people travelling to the All-Ireland hurling final in a few days' time, going to Dublin for a concert. They'd be subject to an additional tax at a time where the cost of living is just so high. This is an additional way for government or indeed local authorities to raise monies. And at this point in time, our industry, the hotel and guest house profession, play their part in a delivery of massive taxes to the country. So in the Dublin case, it is estimated that each hotel guest room pay €1,000 a year in commercial rates, for example. And that should be seen as a way to ring fence for the development of the visitor experience into Dublin, for the upkeep of the public realm, the maintenance of our public lighting, our streetscapes, etc. And that's really important. Also, as well as that, any notion or suggestion of a tourism tax, it is seen as a barrier to growth, and it would absolutely stifle the Ireland's competitiveness at a time
Michael, we're talking about €1 or €2 here a night. In reality, are we? What's the average cost of a hotel in Dublin? About 200 quid, just north of 200 quid a night. So at 1%, €2. I mean, come on.
Well, you know what? Absolutely, €1 or €2. That's fair to say. It's not a lot of money, but here's the point: it doesn't sit well with the consumer, and that was evidenced when there was a landing tax put into Ireland at the time of the financial crisis, and we all saw how unsuccessful that was. It had an impact on visitors coming to the country. Remember, Kieran, Ireland is an open economy. We want visitors visiting Ireland. We want to remove the cap at Dublin Airport, and we rely on tourism. Remember, there are 270,000 livelihoods in the tourism industry in Ireland, in the hotel and guest house sector.
But Michael, is it really your contention, or the contention of your members, that paying €202 for a hotel room as opposed to €200 is going to put people off coming to Dublin?
it's not whether it's €200 or €202. The point is that this is a tax, an additional tax, and people don't like paying taxes. And that's not what we're discussing. Also, in addition to that, when you look at it, if you're a multiple night stay potentially in a city, that €2 adds up. And equally,
yeah, my God, it could become €10. I mean, if you're staying 5 nights in the city, you're paying £1,000 for your hotel room. Again, a tenner. It's just minuscule what we're talking about. This is opposition for the sake of opposition.
Well, I'm not sure of many people paying €1,000 for a room for a hotel in Dublin. But if you're paying €50 in tax for 5 nights stay in Dublin, that's €50 less that you have to spend in other parts of the country. And also there's evidence there as well that the majority of visitors that stay in Dublin, they account for 40% of hotel and guest nights throughout the country. So when visitors leave Dublin after paying their €50 in this tax, which would be seen to be spent in Dublin for the betterment of Dublin, it means that then down the country in local towns and villages where tourism and hospitality is the lifeblood of many of those local economies, that €50 is money that the consumer or the visitor has less to spend in their pockets for other parts of the country. And that is really concerning. Also, I think, Kieran, it's important to point out tourist tax that have been introduced across Europe, they've been seen as barriers to entry. And what that means is that cities and locations around the world, and we've seen the Barcelona case whereby over-tourism is a problem there, and tourist tax have been introduced as a means to cool down the over-tourism in those areas. We're not at a stage at any point in time here in Ireland right now where we have over-tourism. In fact, we're not back at the tourism levels yet since 2019, pre-COVID.
David, what's the evidence internationally? Because we're not reinventing the wheel here. We can look at other jurisdictions where there have been tourist tax introduced. Has it led to a shrinking of the tourist industry?
So in the round, it doesn't show that. But the problem is you're talking about markets that were in the past 10 or 20 years. You had tourism numbers growing, and then you introduce the tax. And then if there's still growth, was it because of the tax? Was it because incomes are going up? Because there's more people eligible to be able to travel? It's hard to pin that one down. On the point of it being, €2 difference on the price of a hotel stay, there are tipping points for consumers. And while it's easy to say that any of us might not be affected by that €2 difference, even if a small percentage of consumers are discouraged by that, that would be, pretty negative for the sector. Now, I think there's a way to look at this that could be neutral for the sector. So the hotel sector have been left out of this rumoured supposed VAT cut that may come through, taking from 13% down to 9%. That's a 4% difference that may be beneficial to restaurants and other sectors, but hotels are not going to get that. So how about we include the hotels and the other accommodation providers with that cut, and then suddenly your 1% or 2% tourist tax, if it's in the mix, if it's in a package of things, would actually be a net benefit for the sector.
Yeah, assuming that the numbers continuing to come here are maintained or continue to grow.
Well, that's also why the government, even considering a package like that, needs to tread carefully. So, there have been increases in the employment levels in the broader hospitality sector that reflects, more people coming here. But, as you alluded to at the top of the show, CSO numbers are starting to wane. When I look at things like the hours worked in the hospitality sector, that's beginning to flatline. Why is that important? Because businesses in those sectors, they tend to cut the hours first before they cut jobs. That's something we really need to monitor over the coming quarters.
I know, what is it that kind of young people say, you should check your privilege? So I'm conscious I'm not doing that when Thomas, put it to you that we go to other European countries and countries around the world, we pay this at the check-in desk when you go in. I can't remember ever seeing somebody checking in front of me or behind me who kind of threw their toys out of the pram about having to pay a couple of euro tourist tax. You don't even think about it. They're probably putting a charge in your card of about 500 quid to make sure you don't throw the TV out the window. And then when it's €2 of a tourist tax, you don't even ask about it.
No, I mean, I'm checking my privilege myself. I was in France 3 weeks ago doing just that, paying that €1 a night to a hotel. It's different. They do it per person per night. It's very bureaucratic because it's French and that's where I'm born. So I knew about it long ago. It's a long established practice there. You pay that little tax per head. Nobody complains about it. I've never heard anybody complain about it. So I think it's not really an economic risk to the sector. What I would be actually more worried about is the bureaucracy of it. Talk about hotels having to set up a new system to collect that €1 or €2 per person per day, account for it, give it to revenue. How often is it going to be? It's a new audit risk that revenue can come and check on you. It's more paperwork. I think you have to think long and hard how you do it, beyond the cost and the actual amount of money involved.
And it strikes me as well, there's a possible administrative issue around the types of accommodation offerings that you're going to impose it on as well. You've got the kind of the whole Airbnb sector out there.
We've only talked about hotels so far tonight. Like in France, it is on everything. Even if you go to a campsite, you pay 20 cents per night per person, just as a token that you are contributing to that. It is a recognition that towns that have a lot of tourists have costs that the local population can't really contribute to. Like, why would somebody in a small coastal village in France that is very quiet 9 months of the year suddenly have to pay for a big beach toilet complex? Like, why would they do that? So we ask tourists to pay for that. And that's fair enough. Dublin, and Paris as well, actually, why do they levy that tax? It's less clear. I think what's more interesting in this debate actually is why Dublin City Council wants €12 million, and the fact that local authorities are seriously underfunded in Ireland compared to other countries internationally. And we have a whole debate at the moment slamming them for not building enough social housing, but every time they want to build one social home, they have to go to central government to ask for the money. They don't have any. And then within Dublin, a few years ago, they decided to lower the local property tax. Now they want to put a new tax on hotels. So it's actually interesting to see that there is a bit of debate around how do we fund local authorities. And that's what I think is triggering something new here.
Michael raises an interesting point, in fairness as well, Mick, about Barcelona and about the issues they've had with tourism and the strain it puts in the city. But I mean, it kind of overlaps a little bit with the point Thomas makes and the question of why. Why do it in Dublin when we don't have those issues?
Yeah, well, I'll give you plenty of reasons why to do it, Kieran. I mean...
Money.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, funding local authorities. Dublin City Council want to get funds this way. I think it's a very progressive way to get funds. Second thing, look, there's a reality in our country going into the future, and it was set out by the Commission of Taxation and Welfare. We're going to need more money. There's no question about that. We're currently lying in the fat of the land, which is the corporate tax income that we're getting. That's not going to be there always. We're going to need more money for an ageing population, for climate change, all of these things. And at every juncture, whenever you try to bring in a new tax, particularly for personal taxes, but here, as we see, Michael did a great job on behalf of his members there, but we see there's lobbying, there's 100 reasons not to do it. And I just think this is more of it there. I think it's a very good idea. I find it very difficult to believe that it's going to impact on the volume of people coming into Dublin City. Now, there are issues in terms of administering it. There are issues as to whether it should apply across the board. There are issues, and I know just down the western coast, there's areas in terms of tourism where it's the main part of the economy, and there are definitely things like that. But as a starting point for a tax on tourists in Dublin hotels, I mean...
But ultimately, should it be more than Dublin then? Well, given the wisdom of it, it should be the whole country. Should it pay in it?
Quite possibly. But I mean, I would start there. But I mean, there are issues, particularly the nature of the economy in rural Ireland, in tourist towns up and down the west coast. There are issues to rise there, no question about that. But as a starting point, that there would be such a controversy over a thing like this, it's reflective of an attitude in this country, and we've a lot to look forward to if that's going to be the case.
Michael, what might make you more open, or your members more open to the imposition of a tourist tax? I mean, for example, if it was detailed how the money was going to be spent and if a certain percentage of it was spent in a way that might complement your business offering.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's important to point out that some local authorities ring fence parts of their commercial rates for that precise purpose, for the development and the upkeeping of our infrastructure for that precise point in terms of developing our tourism landscape across the country. However, from our perspective, I don't think it's about a tourism tax we need to talk about. Remember here, we're looking to tax our consumers again at a time where our people in Ireland and indeed visitors coming to the country are paying enough in taxes. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And Kieran, it might just be €1 or after 5 nights, €5. That €5 though, it'll buy you a 99 in this great weather, something that somebody might have a great experience with. From our perspective, there are other ways in which generating local finances
could be achieved. Yeah, but the €5 also contributes to the Exchequer, or contributes to Dublin City Council's Exchequer funds or their equivalent, and that is spent on public services. I mean, it just doesn't disappear. You're not spending it on a 99, but there's still some good accrued.
Yeah, it's good that you say that, because actually tourism generates actually €10 billion annually to the Exchequer. That's how serious an industry we are. We're the largest indigenous sector in this country. And now to turn around and potentially consider the notion for all those visitors, the domestic visitors that are using our hotels and guest houses in Dublin and potentially across the country, and our international visitors, to ask them to pay more in taxes, that makes absolutely no sense to me. Really, what needs to happen is that the commercial rate space needs to be revalued. And historically, the commercial rate structure has always been primarily on the size of the particular structure, and it's been calculated on that. And really what needs to happen is an overview of the entire commercial base, and therefore
but Michael, so is there not an incongruity in that argument there? Look at the size of our industry, look at how many people we employ, look at how much we benefit the Exchequer every year, upwards of €10 billion, yet we're so fragile, €1 a night on people coming to this country might cause the whole house of cards to collapse.
Well, no, we're not talking about the whole house of cards to collapse. I think that's an exaggeration, to be honest with you, Kieran. But what we're talking about here is the introduction of something that could lead to something more significant in the future. And there always has to be a starting point. And a tourism tax is not the way forward. The commercial rate space has to be looked at. I accept that some of the local authorities around Ireland need more funding to keep public services going and our streetscapes, as I mentioned, to be put in a better place for our visitors. However, there are other ways of looking at it. Taxing the consumer is not the way forward.
With great respect, Michael, it's a bit like infrastructure in this country. Everybody wants it, but they want it somewhere else. Tax needs, we need to take in income. Everybody wants, but not our sector. It has to be somewhere else.
But you know the point Michael makes, sorry, as well, about it starts at 1%, starts at €1, and it leads to something else, to something bigger. I guess that's the fear, is that you've got local councillors or Dublin City Council officials, and they think, listen, we could increase the local property tax, which affects the people who vote for us, or we could hike up the tourist tax on Michael's members, which affects Americans visiting the city who don't.
Yeah, but
let's do the latter.
Common sense kicks in at some stage. At some stage, if they were to do that and to continue to do that, it would quite obviously impact. I don't think there's any obvious impact on the mere introduction of it. And I'm back again to the same thing. Anytime somebody suggests a new tax, a tax that's par for the course in other countries, the world caves in here. We can't do anything.
Well, I'd be willing to propose some taxes that could help the local authorities. Now, local authority budgets, by the way, are up 7.8% this year, so they have risen despite no new tax introductions. But we could be looking at congestion charge, which is when you tax that, you actually get less traffic, right? But when we tax tourism, we might get less tourism. It's probably better to tax less traffic. That's actually better for tourism. And the other thing is rates on state buildings. They're currently not charged. This would allow, if you charged rates on state buildings, it would be kind of Peter to pay Paul, but it would allow for more money to go into the local authority coffers and not be in the state's hands.
Louise, I mean, despite the misgivings, as you say, expressed by Simon Harris, there's not outright opposition to this. In fact, there's some members of his own party, Barry Ward, as I understand, who is absolutely in favour of this.
Yeah, as is James Geoghegan, the former Lord Mayor of Dublin. So there are elements that are supportive of it, but I think at the same time, I think the council, I think especially Dublin City Council, has to prove that they're going to spend this money well. I mean, if you walk around Dublin early in the morning, the dirt, the rubbish, the bags on the side of the street, the seagulls eating the trash, it's not a good look for the city. And as a Dub, it doesn't please me to say this, but the city's filthy. And if this money is going into Dublin City Council or any of the other councils, they have to make Dublin more appealing. And I think that perhaps they need to show that they can do that first, and they need to be supported to do that. But I think they're going to have to show that they can actually maintain the city before they get more money.
All right.